You are listening to the Fertility Talk Series hosted by Blessed Brokenness, a 501c3 bringing spiritual healing and financial blessings to those who suffer from infertility and child loss. Blessed Brokenness serves the community through in-person and virtual faith-based small groups and scholarships for fertility treatments and grief counseling. We hope you will subscribe to our channel and learn more about our ministry and how we are helping men and women find hope and healing through God's Word. Welcome to our Fertility Talk Series. I am Mallory Ware, and this is Ann Adams, and we are the founders of Blessed Brokenness. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Katherine Blackney, and Ann is going to introduce Katherine for us today.
Yes, we are so excited to have Dr. Katherine Blackney with us today. She is a psychologist, and she's licensed as a professional counselor and a clinical sex therapist, and she's worked in the counseling field for 2 decades. So we have a lot of things we want to ask from you. Katherine is also a wife of 12 years, and she's a mother to 5 incredible children that are ages 5 to 11. And 4 of which are her biological children, and 1 was born and birthed in her heart. So we're so excited to hear about that story, as well as your own journey of infertility and how you navigated that as well. So we will put the stage in your hands and let you go with it.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. This is just such a blessing. And today is my bookend's birthday. So my oldest is 11 today, and my youngest is 5. So it's very exciting to be with y'all on the day that I'm celebrating them as well. So thanks for having me.
So excited.
Yeah. So our journey, my husband and our journey, we desire to adopt really when we met each other. And he had adoption just kind of in his heart, and so did I. And so that was just going to be part of our plan as we grew our family. And we pursued Ethiopia as our country, looking at how to expand our family. And we were with an agency for about 4 years, and it just didn't seem like that is where the Lord was desiring to expand our family. So we chose to do domestic, and we got Kiki, my youngest, my 5-year-old. She became part of our family in August of 2017. And so that is how we've expanded our family. It's transracial. She's African-American, and it's an open adoption, which is super special and really cool to navigate, but also really difficult to navigate. So we've done this for, 5 years now. We got her when she was about almost 7 months old. And so we've navigated, what does that look like to have an open adoption? We are very close to her birth mom, and we absolutely adore her. And how my children, so they are 11, 9, 7, 5 and a half, and 5. The girls, the last 2 are girls, and they're 9 months apart. And then the first 3 are boys. And what was wonderful is my 5-year-old last year, she said, Kiki's birth mom birthed her. She carried her in her tummy and birthed her, and didn't want her to be lonely, so she gave her to us to raise. Oh, and it just is such a beautiful way of expanding one's definition of family.
From the mouths of babes. I love that. That's wonderful. And Katherine, you also have a story of loss as well. Is that correct?
Yes. So even though our kids are very close in age, after my second, I had a miscarriage, and then had another miscarriage. And I thought, well, I need to get to the bottom of this, because as most of these women can understand, it takes a toll on you mentally and physically and emotionally and sexually. And so I pursued talking to my gynecologist and going to see a high risk, and found out that I had the MTHFR blood clotting disorder, which was causing not enough folic acid to maintain the baby. So I got on folic acid, and what was amazing is I've had that since birth and didn't know it. And so I'm really blessed to have 2 very healthy children prior to knowing that and getting on the folic acid. So we journeyed those probably a good year of infertility, and really weathering that storm together. And what does that look like as a couple when you do have biological children? and a career and all of that. So, yeah.
Thank you for your vulnerability in that. I know that that really weighs heavy on a lot of this audience's hearts.
Mhm.
You know, establishes a wonderful foundation by which that they know that you hear them and you also can empathize with their pain. So thank you for sharing that with them.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we're excited to get some of your experience and your knowledge and kind of jump into that as well. So where do you want to start?
Okay. Well, it's interesting because when we were just talking about expanding the definition of family, I want to expand the definition of intimacy. And as a sex therapist, I get to do that. I get to help couples redefine what intimacy looks like for them. It's not going to look the same as your neighbor, your best friend, your coworker, and that can be a grief in and of itself. And so I would love to just share a little bit about how to expand the definition of what does intimacy look like in your marriage. And I really want individuals to be seen and known and loved by me. And I know this is a very short way of connecting, but my heart is really to reach individuals. So I do apologize if when I talk about spouse, if somebody is widowed or single, I don't want you to feel left out, but I do want you to hear this message. So I think it's important just to again, redefine what does intimacy look like. So when I look at, and especially like intimacy, how do we create intimacy when we're having to turn our brains on and off with fertility issues? We're having to be so controlled, but yet spontaneous. We are having to, act like nothing's going on and we're totally in the mood when we're calculating ovulation or calculating when the next, IVF treatment's going to be, when the next whatever is going to be. And so how do, as women, because it's a little bit more, we can multitask easier. We actually use more of our brains than men, and which is beautiful and difficult at the same time. Men can just zero in. They can just watch that football game and not even know that you've called them for dinner or that you've called them to ask a question. Whereas women are constantly, okay, well, I need to do the laundry. And did I do the mail? Did I even put out the mail? Okay, what's going to be the next thing? What's my grocery? Oh, I've got to remember crackers on my grocery list. I mean, all of that. And so add fertility in the mix, and something that's supposed to be just organic and natural and spontaneous and easy becomes very calculated and structured and difficult. And so how do we mentally prepare for being intimate? How do we physically prepare for being intimate? How do we emotionally prepare to be intimate? So before we kind of talk about sex, I want to zoom way out and really explore other areas of intimacy that can enhance physical intimacy. So through my experience working with couples and marriages and individuals, and kind of all of my academic endeavors, I've adapted a model for partnerships and marriages. And I like to use the illustration of marriage like a three-legged stool. You have physical intimacy, emotional intimacy, and spiritual intimacy. And when we've mastered each leg of the stool, then the model is even. And we have arrived at a place of health and healing and restoration in our relationships. But that is not generally where my clients are when they come into my office. So I want to just briefly talk about the three different areas and how to maybe enhance and give y'all some nuggets to take home for how to enhance intimacy in those areas. Will that be all right?
Yes.
Love it.
Okay.
Taking
Good.
notes.
I know. I because even outside of infertility, these are great tools and insights. So this is,
It's treasured.
Good. Okay, so emotional intimacy is really defined by connecting intimately on an emotional level and a feeling level. So emotional intimacy comes alive when we're having meaningful dialogue. We're really talking and listening, actively listening to each other. And we're talking about, not about work, not about grocery lists, not about if we do have kids in the home, not about kids or chores that we need to be done around the house. It's really just connecting as husband and wife on that emotional level. When we talk about our highs and lows of the day, we really feel connected because we're getting to know the best part. So I always think it's easy. And sometimes we'll go around the table and say, what was your favorite part of the day? What was your least favorite part of the day? And just allow that connection to happen is really important. And we are validating what everyone is experiencing, what our spouse is experiencing, and they're validating what we're experiencing and just feeling that connection. Constantly striving to become more mature with how we communicate is really important, because that is the number one cause of divorce. Number one cause of miscommunication is not really being mature to say, hey, this is what's going on for me. This is what I'm thinking and feeling. So really learning how to communicate and have meaningful talk expressing thoughts and feelings is important. Another way to increase emotional intimacy is through kind of dreaming together. Where do we want to be in 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now? Like, think about, like, project your relationship into the future, propel your relationship into the future. It extends kind of the life of the marriage and the relationship, and it creates fantasy that provides kind of longevity, and which is exciting and fun to kind of fantasize about the future, but also stay present in the now. So the Penners are Joyce and Cliff Penner were my educators, and they are out in California. Joyce is a nurse and Cliff is a sex therapist, and they're phenomenal. So they came up with an intimacy formula for emotional intimacy. So this will be good to kind of write down. And this is in your brains. I want you to think about being husband and wife, not mom and dad. Okay. Husband and wife. Right. So they want the intimacy level, or the intimacy formula is connecting 15 minutes a day, one night a week, which is your date night. I love date days, and COVID really allowed that to happen, which was pretty special. COVID didn't allow a whole lot. That was pretty special, but that really, I loved hearing my clients go on dates during the day, whether it was taking a walk around the neighborhood or going out to lunch or ordering in, and just having that time during the day. It's kind of special because you have more resources than at 6 o'clock at night. But so 15 minutes a day of just connecting. That's where you can say your highs and your lows. One night a week or one day for your date. One weekend a quarter. So every 3 or 4 months, go out for the weekend, go away for the weekend, and then 1 week a year. So keeping just, and I know sometimes that is like, well, who has enough childcare, or who has the opportunity, or who has the financial funds? That's kind of a goal, right? That's a life goal, is, getting to that place of spending those weekends away, just the two of y'all, and spending a week together, just the two of y'all, just to kind of maintain that connection. So again, I encourage couples to connect through date nights. Remember the time that we would go on date nights and there was not a care in the world. We didn't have responsibilities. We didn't have chores or work to think about necessarily that would impede just being together and being playful. So I really encourage a lot of playfulness in the emotional intimacy, and just having fun together and enjoying one another. So
one thing that we do share with some of our couples in the context of infertility is date night rules. That, rules of engagement of date night, you can't talk about work, just as you said in the 15 minutes, can't talk about the children, and that it's meant to be
finances.
Yeah. Oh, that's got to come off the table. And it's meant to be literally dating your spouse. So I love this because it's definitely reinforcing what, we try to model for our couples. And what I wanted to ask for you, a lot of these couples are walking infertility and the cost of infertility. And just as you said, maybe the financial means is not there. Are there any suggested kind of replacement things or many things that they can do that's just as effective?
Absolutely. And I talk to my clients about that as well. I say, this does not have to be anything financially burdensome. So the definition of holy is set apart. And so some of my clients too are like, well, every night's a date night. We don't have any kids, and I'm like, no. I want one night. I want one night to be holy, which is set apart. Wonderful. So that means you eat in a different room in the house. That means you reserve that night to make your favorite food, or you can go on a walk, You don't have to get a babysitter. You can put, if you do have kids, you can put the kids down a little earlier and just have that time where we're not in front of the TV. We're not watching a movie. We're not on our phones. It really is communicating and actively listening. So it can be as creative. There are a lot of places in Memphis that have free entertainment. And so you can get creative and look at, some restaurants will have, hey, come check out our appetizers. We're trying to figure out what we want to put on the menu. So here's some free appetizers for you to come check out, give us feedback. And so you can be creative and look at what is available in your city that is, that's not going to be financially burdensome, or just go sit outside and visit for 30 minutes together. So something that just, it looks different than every other night. I just want it to be holy and set apart.
I like that.
I do too.
We'll add that to the date night rules.
Yes. Yes.
Good. And when I was going through premarital counseling, the pastor that did it, he asked us to ask each other these two questions. And I thought it was so foundational. And we've been doing it ever since. And I tell all of my clients. So what's important is that connection. And so to ask each other, one, how have you felt loved by me this week? How have you felt loved by me this week? And the second is, how can I love you differently or more? And how can I love you differently or more? And so the idea is, hey, we have performance reviews at the office. We have people kind of touching base with us and like, hey, how are we doing in life, right? But we don't really have like a performance review with our marriage and with our partnerships. And so it's really good to be like, hey, how am I doing? And this is in a very positive, productive conversation. This is not to be defensive. This is not to be constructive. This is really having an open stance of like, how have you felt loved by me this week? And what's really cool is a lot of my clients won't even remember doing or saying what their spouse said was most tender and intimate. And they're like, oh, I don't remember saying that, or I don't remember even doing that. And it's like, yeah, that really meant something to me. And then you're asking for, how can I love you differently or more? How can I be purposeful in that emotional intimacy? And sometimes my clients are like, well, just keep doing what you're doing. Or, gosh, I really love it if you could empty the dishwasher more often. And sometimes you figure out people's love languages in those times. So I encourage during your date night or your date day to ask those two questions every week, just as kind of a litmus test of like, hey, how are we doing? And I want to make sure that my efforts are successful and rewarded, and that you're feeling loved and that we're just kind of maintaining that emotional intimacy together.
I love that. Yeah, that's really good.
Well, then we'll jump to spiritual intimacy. And this is really where I have the privilege of working with clients that come from all walks of faith. And so I just have this open stance of allowing them to kind of dictate, what does that mean? A lot of them are very confused, like, spiritual intimacy, why would that be part of the stool? Why would they be part of the marital intimacy? And spiritual intimacy is defined as like connecting on a deeper spiritual level. That kind of fits your marriage. We all have something existential that we believe kind of keeps us intimately connected to each other, to our spouses. And I love that this is a place of faith, and that y'all speak so much truth into that, which is beautiful and wonderful, because it's really important to connect on that spiritual level. And I think the spiritual intimacy component is missed a lot in marriages, or it's overemphasized. And so again, if you think about the three-legged stool, if you put too much emphasis on the spiritual intimacy, it can topple over. And so we really have to have it just be as intimate as emotional, as intimate as spiritual, as intimate as physical. And so some examples are reading a devotion together, praying together, attending, a Bible study together, or church, Sunday school class, some kind of community building. And then that can generate questions to connect them, doing a workbook together. So usually I just kind of encourage them to build their spiritual intimacy, with what seems best for them. And it allows them to start thinking beyond themselves and think outside of themselves. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We
So,
talk to our couples and really encourage them to pray with one another too. And it can always be kind of that awkwardness in the beginning,
yeah.
but everybody, when they come back and we kind of talk about how it goes, and they're like, it just automatically brings them closer together. And it's
There's
such
a security.
a thing.
There's security in that,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, absolutely. And,
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you, what would be an example of too much, of that spiritual leg? What does that look like?
Well, I think sometimes if we use scripture in a negative way, like if we're legalistic with scripture
Sure.
and well, it says for you to submit to me, and this is what it looks like.
Sure.
If some people will get the wrong impression of, well, um, you know, God says to produce and have kids and to plentify the world, and this isn't happening. So obviously something's wrong with you, and maybe this is a generational sin, or maybe this is God trying to say something. So I think sometimes we can misconstrue or leverage scripture in a really damaging, harmful way. I know some of my clients have heard from spiritual leaders that depression is you're just not praying hard enough, and that's just not the case. Thankfully we have come a long way with understanding theology and psychology and having that beautiful blend of both to understand that there are neurotransmitters in our bodies that are often taking place
Right.
in depression and in anxiety, and it's just not a darkness of the soul. It's a lot of things going on,
That is
so
great tool. And
Mhm.
so it sounds like it's more rooted in condemnation than it is
Mhm.
in building each other up.
Absolutely, and encouragement, sure.
That's so helpful. Thank you.
Good. So then we get to physical intimacy, and physical intimacy is really defined by connecting on a physical level. And this can be the most intimate level, but it's just as intimate as all the other ones. And so that's why I talk about it last, because I don't want it to be the most important thing, right? And what's so difficult with infertility, it becomes the most important thing.
Yes.
Because you're on a rhythm, you're on a schedule, you're seeing doctors, you're having to do all these things. And so it does become more of a focus than the spiritual and the emotional.
Right.
And it needs to be just the same. And how do we do that? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit. It's difficult. You need to come up for air. You need to have moments where you have physical, non-sexual touch.
Mm.
I just want y'all to hug and kiss and it not be sexual. It just be physical, get that oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, get that surging, and just allow that connection without any anxiety or demand to perform, without any, like, this is leading to the bedroom. I want there to be days where there's physical, non-sexual touch just to make it normal, and not every time we're intimate, we're trying to conceive. That's really, really difficult because mentally that will be very challenging as you're navigating how to go about this.
Sure.
So the physical intimacy, it ranges again from holding hands, kissing, sitting on the couch together, maybe with legs draped over each other, to arousal and erotic orgasmic lovemaking. So it's kind of the whole gamut. There's a continuum of physical intimacy, and a lot of people they don't know there is a continuum. It's kind of either we have sex or we don't.
Right.
And I think also the older that we get, the less flirtatious we are. And the more we struggle with infertility, the less flirtatious we are as well. It's kind of like, all right, let's get to it. Like, we're on the clock. And so how do we bring some of those components back in of being playful? And we'll talk about that as well. So when we are mentally, emotionally, and spiritually connected with our spouses, our sex life really comes alive in this really beautiful way. We can be creative, we can be playful, generous, childlike, and just enjoy being with each other. I think it's important to have sexual intimacy during your season of infertility, sexual intimacy that is not related to we want to create a baby.
Sure.
Okay, so I want there to be times where, and I'm sure y'all have talked about this, where there are times that, hey, this is for this purpose, and this is just for fun. This is for connecting. I've missed you. This is a really powerful way to feel connected and to kind of get centered in the marriage. So if we are focused and disciplined in these areas of intimacy with emotional, spiritual, and physical, we're enhancing and enriching our relationship to be more three-dimensional, and with really that position of kind of mind, body, and soul. And it just enhances, and again, it restores and redefines what does sexual intimacy look like for us. So
that's so powerful. And one thing we do try to really hone in on is that intimacy was created by God. It is not a painful thing. It's actually a beautiful, sweet way that not only we can serve our spouse, but we can also glorify Him. And so I feel like, there is an element that wraps it all in, that as we come forward with pure motives, to, just be present and to glorify the Lord in it, that it draws everything in to what it was really created for. So I love kind of how you beat that out for us.
yeah, well, I tell my clients it's an act of worship.
Yes,
like, what? It's like fasting and prayer. It's an act of worship. And so, yeah, absolutely.
So, absolutely.
And again, it's, the difficulty is it's been a little perverted when you're having to think more clinically than just spontaneously about sexual intimacy, and it becomes more mechanical than it does just an act of worship. Then it's really hard, and we have to step back and say, all right, let's redefine, let's restore what God meant for good. Satan is definitely going to want to attack. So how do we restore what our intimacy is and what that looks like for us? And how do we restore it back to being an act of worship? So
that's awesome.
That's so good. I know there's a lot of times, and I'm sure you have heard this, and it's out, it's a common phrase when couples are going through infertility and the unfortunate results of the schedules get take over, in which adds extra stress and all of that. And then when they finally take a break, or they're like, kind of give up on it, and a lot of times there is a pregnancy that happens after, but people are like, oh, it's because you don't have any stress and you just let it go. You don't have to. But really it's them getting back to what their marriage should look like. They're being playful. They took the schedules off the table. There's intimacy how intimacy should look. I know it happened in for me during my journey as well. But I look back and I said, I'm just going to really focus on our marriage over this season. And it was, just the mental level, the physical, everything that you've laid out, spiritual, mental, and emotional. It was so much more enjoyable, just as God had intended that relationship to look. And so I think there's reasons for what you're saying, as far as just being playful, don't have the intentions of we're having sex today to make a baby.
Yeah.
That there are other moments that are just for the marriage and for our spouse.
Right. Yes. And that can also, if we are just putting the focus on, hey, this is for procreation, there's performance anxiety.
Yes.
And there's going to be potential pain for my women because they're not properly lubricated. They're not, mindfully grounded and rooted in the present. And, it can be a really negative experience. And our bodies, we have memory cells. We remember that. Our body's going to remember pain. We're going to remember if we have some performance anxiety and are not able to achieve erections or, and so then that can cause a real stink in the marriage, that something that's supposed to be made to grow and bond together, it's something that now is really tearing apart because of that anxiety. So I think you're right. It's tricky and it's messy and it's difficult, and everyone is trying to do their very, very best. And I do believe that. I believe that people try their very best, and their best has got to be good enough for them. And so if I see that, I can grab hold of what they're doing and really just encourage them to do more of that. But what is a way to connect where, after you've been intimate, you roll over that side, he rolls over that side, and y'all don't talk, right? So.
It's like a task that's been checked off. Yes.
Mm-hmm. My professor said on a continuum, one is duty, pity, sex, right? I'm just doing it because I have to, and check. And then, maybe 10 days later, I get a pass, and then I'll have to kind of do duty, sex again. And then 10 is desire. I'm aroused physiologically. And a lot of my women have lower testosterone. Physiologically, they don't have cues where they are turned on, and it can be more difficult. Again, women are more multitaskers, so they're not really connecting with their bodies as much as men are to know if they're aroused or if they're, into wanting to be intimate. So on that scale of 1 to 10, my professor says, like, if you can be a 4, 5, or 6, that's wonderful. So for women, there is going to be a little bit of that. It's been a while, kind of duty, but I desire to be close, which is a little bit more passion to be able to say, I think I'm gonna make it happen. And I read in this book, it's called Structured Spontaneity. And I love that. So for women, we can't just, you've heard the term, like, we're crock pots and men are microwaves, and, and sometimes, yes, that is the case. Sometimes it's not. It takes a little while for the woman to, to grow in her kind of affection and eroticism to get ready for sexual intercourse. And whereas a man, that's a little bit of a shorter period. He can be ready sooner than a woman sometimes. And I see it all different ways in my practice, for sure. But it's important to just have that structured spontaneity where the woman's like, you know what, we don't have soccer practice tonight. I don't have book club. We don't have anything going on. I think I'm going to initiate. And that's the structured spontaneity that she can then initiate later on in the day to say, hey, honey, do you want to have some intimacy tonight? Do you want to get together and be physical? And so that's a way for women to feel successful. And I just love that. I love structured spontaneity because women, we're always multitasking, and we do need to clear our schedules to drop down into our bodies and to be mindful and to be present. It's a real discipline, that mindfulness, to be present and mindful during physical intimacy. So sometimes it's important for women to be like, all right, I need to get all the laundry done. I need to, make sure the mail's out. I need to do all these things. I need to put all the groceries up. And then I can mentally be present for sex. So I think I'm going to initiate tonight.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to ask for you. I love how you kind of put it on a continuum of a 1 to a 10. And, a lot of these couples have been going through this for 5 years, 10 years. And especially the ones are to the point where IVF is the only option. And so the creation can be artificially done. So the need for intimacy is off the table. And so in that case, a lot of them, they're so traumatized by just repeated disappointment. You see a lot of PTSD form where just the women, every month, their body fails to do what it was supposed to do. And there's so much shame and guilt in that. And it just becomes fixated. So what happens is both the marriage, every leg, especially the physical end, goes to a 0. And so I really want to kind of, you can't eat an elephant in a day. You take small bites. So for those who are at a 0, what are some practical ways that they can slowly come about to that 3 or 4 or 5, or, just be present in that way that they don't remember how to,
Sure. Absolutely. So I think the physical non-sexual touch is really important.
Okay.
And I think it's because physiologically there is no demand. When we are having physical non-sexual touch, there's no demand that this has to end in the bedroom. So when I am going to, flirt or make out with my husband in the middle of the day, I can fully be present and have my body physiologically shift and desire that, because I know that I'm going to go off to work, or he's going to go do his thing, or I'm going to go do my thing. And I can put forth that effort. So you feel more successful as a woman of like, okay, I'm engaging in this physical non-sexual touch. I'm allowing the oxytocin and the really good bonding hormones of vasopressin for the husband to help kind of create that bond in a way that there isn't this demand or anxiety, or it has to end in an attempt to procreate. And so one of my professors calls it purple days. So he has these different colors of intimacy, but the physical non-sexual touch is called the purple day. So there's orange intimacy, purple intimacy, and green. So I'm just going to talk about purple for the sake of our time. And purple intimacy is what's called making love with your clothes on. So it cannot lead to orgasmic lovemaking. It is just for physical non-sexual touch. It's the flirtatiousness I was talking about earlier that we've really lost. And I think probably for couples who've been through this for 10 years, 5 years, they've lost the art of flirting, because it's either we have sex for that role or we don't have sex, but we're not being playful and flirtatious during that. So on the days where we're having purple love, we fully engage in physical non-sexual touch without the demand, anxiety, or fear of rejection, or like that performance anxiety, or gosh, this has got to be it. This has got to be it. Or, like you said, if they're just doing IVF and that's where they are, like, how do we restore and reclaim and redefine what sexual intimacy is? And that's, again, we go back to, it's an act of worship. It's being playful. It's connecting on a level that's the most powerful level we have. And so I think allowing those physical non-sexual, those purple days, to just help them connect.
Right.
Physiologically, their bodies are going to start shifting, and actually they may start feeling desire that, again, they can reclaim and redefine as good.
That's so helpful.
Yeah, I think it is, like you just mentioned, the more you do it, the more you desire it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like when all the legs are even, or as you're getting there, as you're putting a little time into each of those, you desire more of each of those. And so it becomes easier to do. It's just more natural, as opposed to, the schedules and the, do I have time, or am I really in the mood? But being able to.
Yeah, it becomes more authentic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. It becomes kind of like, this is what we do.
Jump right in and all of, but just like Ann said, a little bit at a time, and it'll build up, and you'll be more authentic and desire your spouse and that intimacy.
Yeah. And some days you're going to feel that physical desire and want to be intimate. And then other days you're not. Some of my clients know when they ovulate, and that's how the Lord created, is around ovulation. There's you're on the higher number on that continuum of desire, because your body is physically desiring and longing and wanting. So you're more energized to want to be intimate around ovulation. So sometimes my clients will capitalize on their body's helping them out during that time of the month, where they don't have to muster up the desire. It's like, oh, I can tap into, my body's already physiologically and hormonally aligned to feel that desire. So it's tricky. A lot of it is also going to be psychoeducation and communication. It's helping these couples communicate. It's grieving and looking at, I work a lot with genitopelvic pain with my women. Mm-hmm. And so what we have to do is we have to grieve that sex is just going to look very differently than it does for our friends and our neighbors. And so how do we redefine, what does that intimacy look like for us when there has been any pain or infertility that's been associated? That's just kind of thwarted the naivety, I guess, of physical intimacy and how easy it should or it could be for other people. And so you just want to reclaim, okay, this is how we're redefining what intimacy is for us. And that can feel really connecting. And a lot of it is the grief of it's not going to be this way, but then the hope it's going to be this way. So
that's so great. And I love how you're individualizing it. I think that there's a broad stroke put on something, and friends who have this, great connection, and you just feel so lost because it's not only is it not happening, but we're not seeing the fruit of it. So I love how you're individualizing it. So redefine it for what, your marriage looks like, but at the same time, removing the pressure of it. It doesn't always have to be a 10, just because it's not always the best of the best doesn't mean that you're failing.
Right.
It's about each day, each moment, and the intentionality behind it. So that's awesome. I love how you kind of restructure that.
Good. And it's also giving yourself and your spouse a lot of grace.
Sure.
Giving an abundance of thank yous, like just being appreciative, having that stature of being appreciative can go a really long way, especially when, like, let's say you do have a newborn or you have young children in the home, or there's just demanding, conflicting job schedules, and how are we intimate? It's give yourself a lot of grace. And your life is not always going to be like this. You're not always going to be here in this season. And there needs to be a lot of forgiveness and grace extended often as you're navigating this really tricky, broken, difficult season, but yet season where we grow closer to understanding how the Lord has created us and how we can align and be more like Him authentically and genuinely. And so it's really, how do we embrace the role that God's placed us in, while also being real and raw, and again, extending a lot of grace and have an abundance of thank yous. Those are my main two things to give to clients, is just have an abundance of thank yous for yourself, for your spouse, for those around you, and extend a lot of grace to yourself and your spouse, because it's hard. It's difficult.
It is. And this is so great because not just for the season of infertility, but these are foundational things. Like you said, when hopefully the family grows or you walk into another season that's hard. These are things that we need through every season of our life. Every day we need to be working on our relationship with our spouse, and in each of those three areas. So I think this is so fantastic for just the whole gamut and in all those seasons that we will go through. Because we know that they will become, as soon as you get over one, you'll be on the hill, and then another will come. But these are great tools, great resources to equip us for those seasons of hard times and just really connect with our spouse. So thank you so much. Those are awesome.
Good.
Well, is there, I know we've gotten so much good stuff, and I need to go write all of this down as soon as we end this fertility talk, but is there anything else you want to leave us with, Katherine, or?
Well, sometimes people ask, what is a sex therapist? How do I find one? So I just was going to share a little bit about the uniqueness of a sex therapist. A sex therapist is somebody who's trained to work with sexual trauma, sexual abuse, sexual dysfunction, out of control sexual behaviors, sexual orientation, intimacy disorders, when one spouse wants it more than the other, that desire discrepancy, unconsummated marriages and partnerships, arousal and orgasmic disorders, erectile difficulties, the gamut. So these are just some specific topics that we embrace and are trained to treat. And so if one is experiencing any of these symptoms, it would be really beneficial to contact a sex therapist. And me being in Memphis, I do have a list of contacts through my graduate school. So I went to Ridgemont University, which is through Institute for Sexual Wholeness in Atlanta. And so it's a Christian-based sex therapy program, which is amazing. So they do the theology and the psychology and have a beautiful blend of both. And so we have the opportunity, those that, that graduate and become clinical sex therapists from that program, we have the opportunity to really bring God into a lot of how we do our job, which is really cool. So they have a database of therapists all over the US.
Right.
And so that's always a great resource. That's usually where I kind of tap back into if somebody from another state that I'm not licensed in will say, hey, how can I find somebody? Is I will go to that website, and I'll give that to y'all after we're done with this, and y'all can post that because sometimes it just is really helpful to talk to somebody about this infertility and how do we redefine sexual intimacy in a way that we love the Lord. And so that's what would be really unique about a sex therapist. So generally, contacting a therapist, the first session is going to be fact finding, information building, connecting, usually the first 2 sessions. And then depending on what the therapist wants to do, it can be anywhere from 6 to 8 sessions to where you start seeing change. And a lot of it, again, is going to be psychoeducation. You're going to have a clinician who is going to be educating y'all on ways to communicate, ways to increase emotional and spiritual and physical intimacy, and then how to navigate conflict, how to navigate difficulties, and how to redefine what makes y'all's marriage thrive. So I tell my clients, like, I want to equip, empower, and enrich you to be the best versions of yourselves, be the best versions of your marriage. I don't have that magic wand. The magic of therapy happens in between sessions. And so I really encourage, I tell the client they have the magic. I just have to cultivate it out of them and increase that and enhance that. So that's really my job as a therapist, is to come alongside and really be that cheerleader for my clients. And so therapy can really be beneficial. There are some great groups as well, and group therapy can be very beneficial too. As you see with this group, you're not alone, and other people have, they're on the same journey, but they could be different chapters away from you, but we're all kind of in this together. And that communal understanding is really powerful in a way that you may not get with, your book club. So group is really, really helpful. I once did a men's group for my women that were experiencing pain. So I had my women's group, and then I had the men's group, because there's just a uniqueness of grief that goes along with pain. And sometimes their pain is long suffering. And so that's, they needed kind of a place to be like, oh, wow, I'm not alone. And other guys are going through this, because this is not something that men really talk about. And so, but they feel very isolated.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes even finding a group for men, for the spouses, can be really important too.
That is so helpful. And I know a lot of people are thinking that, oh my goodness, I would love for, my husband and I, or my wife and I, to go and do this, but I know my spouse will not agree to it. Mm-hmm. Is it still beneficial? I mean, I imagine it is, but is it still beneficial to kind of come as an individual approach and kind of glean from that?
Well, I tell clients, I say, hey, we win together, we lose together. There's nobody that's the identified patient. So if the woman comes in and she has the fertility issues, if the woman comes in and she has the pain issues, if the man comes in and he has the erectile issues, I say, we're all in this. We win together, we lose together. Because once you have one that's the identified patient or the scapegoat, that shame and guilt is so difficult to come out from under. And this is a we issue. So I collectively, I will change the language, even if they start saying, well, I couldn't do this, or, well, it's my fault. I said, no, this is a we issue. And I really hone that in.
Oh, that's so helpful.
That's good, because there is, just like you said, there's a lot of shame, a lot of unworthiness, guilt that comes with the infertility process, and one does like to take ownership of it a lot of times. And I don't know really.
Well, it's a control thing. We want to feel like we have control.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, but sometimes that striving for control can leave somebody feeling very isolated and broken.
Yes.
Right.
And
right.
when you already feel like your body's betrayed you. Like,
Right.
what's going on? This is, my body's betrayed me. And so I do think at times it's going to be important for the woman to have some individual counseling to maybe reconnect with her body and be more body affirmative when she has felt so betrayed by her body. And so, and just a lot of grief and anger towards the Lord of like, this is supposed to be easy. Like, why is this, so just having space for that. So there's sometimes where individual counseling is important, sometimes where couples counseling is really effective, and then group counseling, depending on if it's a really good group, is also beneficial too.
That's wonderful. That's so helpful. And I know that there's a lot of emotion that comes in it when women feel like their body is failing, but the men feel like they're under this massive pressure. And then because that performance anxiety, they don't perform. And then she gets mad because she's like, we've missed our window. And, then he feels even more ashamed. And it's just a vicious cycle. So we just highly recommend, there's humility in seeking help, and there is no shame, and kind of setting that pride aside of what really matters, what someone thinks about me or the quality of my marriage. So we are just so honored that we get to spend this time with you, and so grateful to you for just pouring into these couples in such a wholesome, foundational way, because I truly believe that you can't remove the creator from something he created and understand it. So I appreciate your biblical foundation in it, and which nourishes and enriches it from the get-go.
Thank you for listening to the Fertility Talk Series hosted by Bless Brokenness. To join a small group or apply for a fertility scholarship, please visit our website at blessbrokenness.org. We hope you will join us for our next Fertility Talk, available every second Tuesday of the month.